AITA for moving abroad to leave my girlfriend after she chose her ex over me? My name is Jacob, and I am 28 years old. A little over a month ago, I ended a relationship that lasted about a year with my now ex-girlfriend, Haley, who is also 28. For most of our time together, things were pretty stable. We did not have any major fights or strange situations. I met Haley through some mutual friends at a small backyard barbecue one of them was hosting for their birthday. It was a simple get-together, just a small group of us chatting, eating burgers, and enjoying the evening. We talked a lot that night. I remember she struck me as a calm person with a great sense of humor and a very direct way of speaking. She did not beat around the bush when saying what she thought, and that caught my attention. By the end of the party, we had exchanged numbers and started talking frequently. Over the first few months, our relationship developed in a completely normal way. We would go out to dinner some nights, see a movie on others, and sometimes we would just take a walk through a park downtown, talking about whatever came to mind. At the time, Haley was working an office job at a small marketing firm. However, a few months in, she made a big decision to quit. Her plan was to start her own online business. She wanted to sell customized items like mugs, notebooks, and keychains, basically things that could be personalized with names, quotes, or custom designs. She told me she had always wanted to create something of her own and did not want to spend her life working for someone else, always answering to a boss. When she explained her vision to me, I was fully supportive. I thought it was great that she wanted to build her own project. Plus, my job provided a certain level of financial stability, so I was not too worried about our situation at the time. I work as a regional manager for a fairly large logistics company. I prefer not to mention the name, mostly to avoid any misunderstandings or unnecessary drama. It is not that I am doing anything wrong. I just like to keep my personal life and my work life separate. When Haley decided to leave her job, we sat down and had a calm conversation about it. She explained that, in the beginning, her business probably would not generate a steady income and that it would take time for things to get off the ground. I told her that was perfectly fine and that we could manage our finances accordingly. In practice, that meant for a good while, I covered almost all of our expenses. I paid the rent on our one-bedroom apartment, the groceries, the utilities, the internet bill, and the gas for the car when we went out, which covered pretty much every daily expense. I am not saying this to complain, at least not at first. For me, it was just a temporary phase while her project started to take shape. During those initial months, there were no real issues. Haley dedicated a lot of time to her business. She spent hours designing products, researching suppliers, and watching online tutorials about printing techniques and customizing items. Meanwhile, I was at work most of the day. When I got home in the evening, we would have dinner together and talk about how our days went. As for her past, I knew she had been in a pretty long relationship before she met me. I think they were together for several years. However, she always told me that the relationship had ended on good terms and that they no longer kept in touch. She never gave me any reason to doubt her. In fact, for almost the entire time we were together, the topic of her ex-boyfriend never came up in our important conversations. That is why, when things started to change, it caught me completely by surprise. It all started a few months ago. One day, Haley mentioned that some of her old co-workers were organizing a reunion. As she explained it, it had been a long time since they had all seen each other, and many had changed jobs or even moved to different cities. The idea was to get together at a local bar to catch up. She asked if it would bother me if she went. I told her I had no problem with it at all. I have never been the type of person who tries to control where their partner goes or who they see. In my view, if you have to ask for permission for everything you do, the relationship probably has deeper issues. So, that night she went to the reunion, and I stayed home. I remember telling her to have a good time and to text me when she got back, just so I knew she was home safe. Everything seemed completely normal. She came home a bit late, but that did not seem strange either. It was a social event, after all. When she arrived, she was in a cheerful mood, the way people usually are after reuniting with old friends. We sat and talked for a while, and she told me who was there. In the middle of the conversation, she mentioned something that did not seem important to me at the time. She said that her ex-boyfriend had also been at the reunion. I asked her, quite casually, if they had spoken. She said yes, that they had chatted for a bit. According to her, it was all very normal, just two people saying hello after a long time. She also mentioned again that their relationship had ended peacefully and that there were no hard feelings between them. I remember her saying something like, "We broke up years ago, but we never had any drama. It just was not working anymore." At that moment, I saw nothing wrong with it. Many people maintain a cordial relationship with their exes, and it does not necessarily mean there is anything more to it. However, after that night, small changes started to appear. At first, they were very subtle details. For example, Haley started mentioning her ex-boyfriend in some of our conversations. Sometimes she would comment that he was working somewhere new or that he was thinking about moving. Nothing really significant, but his name started popping up with some regularity. One day, she told me that at the reunion, they had all exchanged numbers again to stay in touch as a group of former colleagues. Among those people was him. I will not lie, I was not thrilled with the idea, but I decided not to say anything at that moment. I figured it would probably be an occasional thing, maybe a text message every now and then, and nothing more. As time went on, however, I started to notice that they were talking a lot. It is not that I was snooping on her phone or anything like that. It was just obvious. For instance, we would be sitting on the couch watching a movie, and her phone would suddenly light up with a text. She would reply, then another would come in, and then another. One day, I asked her who she was texting. With total calmness, she told me it was her ex-boyfriend. I asked her why they were talking so much. Her answer was simple. She said they were friends now. It was at that point that the first arguments began. At first, they were not huge fights, but rather uncomfortable conversations that slowly started to create tension between us. I told her I found it strange that after years of not speaking, they had suddenly started communicating so frequently. She insisted that there was nothing strange about it. As she explained, they had simply run into each other at the reunion and, while reminiscing about their old workplace, had picked up their conversation like two old friends. But as the weeks passed, I started to feel increasingly uneasy. There was one moment in particular that I still remember very clearly. It was a Saturday morning, and Haley and I were at the supermarket doing our monthly grocery shopping. It was one of our usual routines, walking the aisles, filling the cart, and talking about what we needed at home. While we were looking at some products on a shelf, I suddenly heard someone call her name. When I turned to see who it was, I realized it was her ex-boyfriend. Before I could even react, Haley let go of the shopping cart and walked quickly toward him. The expression on her face surprised me. She looked entirely too excited to see him. She greeted him with a long hug, and they immediately started chatting very naturally, as if they were two people who had not seen each other in ages. The funny thing was, as she herself had told me, they had been texting constantly for weeks. I stood there by the cart for a few seconds, not really sure what to do. Finally, she called me over to introduce us. "Jacob, this is Brandon." We shook hands and had a brief, fairly superficial conversation. We talked about trivial things like the weather and work, the kind of topics you discuss out of politeness. After a few minutes, Brandon said he had to get on with his shopping and said goodbye. When we got back to our cart, I could not help but ask her why she had been so enthusiastic about seeing him. She replied that it was a completely normal reaction when you run into someone who was a part of your life for so many years. I told her that from my perspective, it seemed a bit over the top. She disagreed. That conversation ended up turning into a small argument. It was the first of several. From that day on, more situations started to arise that made me feel uncomfortable. None of them was a huge deal on its own, but when I put all the details together, the overall feeling was quite strange. At the same time, our financial situation at home was also beginning to create some pressure. Haley's business was not taking off as she had hoped. There were weeks when she managed to sell a few things, but for the most part, her income was very low or non-existent. That meant I was still paying for absolutely everything. I never complained to her directly, but it was obvious that the entire financial responsibility was on my shoulders. Between my demanding job, the household bills, and the arguments that were becoming more frequent over her friendship with Brandon, I began to feel our relationship changing. One night, I decided to address the issue more directly. I explained that the frequency with which she spoke to Brandon and some of the recent events were making me uncomfortable. Her response was very clear. She told me that he was just a friend, that their romantic relationship had ended years ago, and that if I had a problem with it, it was something I needed to work through on my own. Meanwhile, the conversations between them continued. There were times she would be typing on her phone with a smile on her face. When I would ask what was so funny, she would reply matter-of-factly that she was talking to Brandon, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I tried to convince myself that maybe I was overreacting. After all, she constantly repeated that there was nothing going on between them, but that uneasy feeling just would not go away. The moment that truly changed everything happened on a Friday night. That day, I got home from work later than usual. It had been a really tough week at the office, and all I wanted was to have a quiet dinner and relax. When I walked into the apartment, I noticed something was different. Haley was getting dressed up. She was wearing an outfit that was much nicer than what she normally wore to stay home. She was also packing a small duffel bag. At first, I thought maybe she was going out with a friend, which did not seem strange. What caught my attention was that she had not mentioned anything to me beforehand. As I put my stuff down, I asked her calmly, "Are you heading out?" She replied without giving it much thought, "Yep." I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water before asking again, "Who are you going with?" That is when she said something that left me completely floored. With absolute nonchalance, she answered, "I am going to spend the weekend with my ex and some other friends." I remember standing there in silence for a few seconds. I expected her to add more details, as if maybe she had left out a crucial piece of information. But she kept talking as if she were describing a perfectly normal plan. "Brandon bought a cabin up in the mountains," she continued. "So we will probably be doing get-togethers there every weekend." At that moment, I genuinely did not know what to say. I was shocked by how directly she said it, as if it were an everyday occurrence. After a few seconds, I finally managed to reply, "You cannot be serious." She looked at me with a mix of surprise and a bit of impatience. "Why not?" I took a deep breath before answering. "Why are you telling me you are going to spend the entire weekend at a cabin with your ex-boyfriend?" She frowned slightly. "It will not just be him," she said. "Other friends are going too." I replied immediately, "That really does not change much." At that point, her attitude shifted. She zipped up the duffel bag and leaned against the counter. "Here we go again," she said with a tired sigh. "I have told you so many times that he and I are just friends." I felt the conversation falling into the same old pattern, but this time, the situation was different. "This is not the same as texting," I answered. "You are telling me you are going to spend the whole weekend in a cabin with him?" She crossed her arms. "If you are insecure, that is your problem." That phrase really got to me. "It is not about insecurity," I said. "It is about having boundaries." She let out a short laugh that sounded more like a scoff than genuine humor. "Boundaries," she repeated. "So now you are going to tell me who I can spend my time with." "I am not saying that," I replied. "What I am saying is that this whole situation is pretty strange." Right then, I saw her expression change. Her face went from annoyed to a clear mix of irritation and defiance. "So what? You do not trust me?" she asked. The question made me pause for a second. I did not answer right away because I wanted to choose my words carefully. Trusting someone does not mean you have to ignore something that makes you feel uncomfortable, I finally said. She shook her head, clearly disagreeing. "You are overreacting to everything." I tried to explain to her more calmly what I was thinking. "You are saying you are going to spend the weekend in a cabin where he will also be, basically sleeping a few feet away from you." She did not take long to reply. "You are really exaggerating." Then she added something that she clearly thought would reassure me. "I already told you that several friends are going too." I looked at her for a few seconds before answering. "And that is supposed to make me feel better." Her patience seemed to be wearing thin. "You are unbelievably insecure," she said with obvious annoyance. I tried to stay calm, though it was clear the conversation was escalating. "It is not about insecurity," I repeated. "It is about respect within a relationship." She sighed, visibly frustrated. "Whatever happened between Brandon and me ended years ago." Then she said something I honestly never expected to hear. "There is no physical attraction between us anymore." I stayed quiet, but she kept talking as if she were explaining something that, to her, was perfectly logical. "We know absolutely everything about each other," she added. Hearing that sentence made me feel quite uncomfortable, but what she said next surprised me even more. "He has seen me in my most vulnerable state countless times," she continued. "Way more times than you have." For a second, I thought I must have misheard her, but she did not stop there. "And I have seen him the same way," she added. That kind of curiosity just is not there anymore. At that moment, I genuinely did not know how to react. I never expected to hear something like that in the middle of an argument, not just because of what she was saying, but because of the casual way she said it. It was as if she were using that point to prove that there was nothing between them, but the effect was the exact opposite. All I felt was a mix of disbelief and frustration. "Did you really just say that like it is supposed to make me feel better?" I asked her. She just shrugged. "It is the truth." I was still trying to process what I had just heard. "That does not make the situation any better," I replied. At that moment, she grabbed the duffel bag that was on the counter. "I am not going to keep arguing about this." She walked toward the door while I stood there in the living room. Before leaving, she stopped for a moment, turned around, and said one last thing. "Use this weekend to think about your insecurity and your fragile masculinity." Then she opened the door and walked out of the apartment. The last thing I heard was the sound of the door clicking shut. For several minutes, I just stood there in the living room, completely still. I was not yelling or throwing things or making any kind of scene. I was just trying to understand what had just happened. The argument had been more intense than our previous ones, but what really stuck with me was the way she had handled the entire situation. She did not seem to see anything inappropriate about spending weekends at a cabin with her ex-boyfriend. Nor did she seem to understand why that might be uncomfortable for someone in a relationship. And to be honest, the things she had said during the argument did nothing to calm me down. I sat down on the couch and tried to organize my thoughts. I did not want to react impulsively, but it was also clear that something in our relationship had fundamentally changed. As I sat there, an idea began to form in my head. It was something that had been in the back of my mind for a while, but until that moment, I had never seriously considered it. Now, after what had just happened, it was starting to look like a very real possibility. That night, after Haley left, I stayed in the living room for a long time. I did not turn on the TV or do anything special. I just sat there thinking. I did not text her or call her. I knew any attempt to talk at that moment would only lead to another argument, so I decided to just let it be. I made myself a simple dinner, checked a couple of work emails, and eventually went to bed. To my surprise, I slept quite well. I do not know if it was because I was so tired or if my mind was just too exhausted to keep dwelling on it, but I fell asleep without much trouble. The next morning, I woke up early, as I usually do. It was Saturday, and normally it would have been a quiet day, but I had some work I wanted to get a head start on from home. While I was having breakfast, I saw I had a message from Haley. It was a rather long one. I opened it and started reading. It said, "I am here at the cabin, babe. We fought really badly before I left, and it hurts me so much that we said goodbye like that." I kept reading. "I want you to know that I love you and I value everything you do for me. I know this is hard to accept, but believe me, I am only here for my friends." I continued scrolling through the message. "I am not going to do anything wrong. I am different. I am not like other girls." The next part especially caught my attention. "I am not like those girls who cheat. I am unique. I am faithful to you and to our relationship." I kept reading. "This is just a test of our love, and we have to overcome it. We have to move forward together." Then came another sentence. "Believe me, in a month these trips will seem normal to you, and we will be laughing about our insecurities in the future." The message ended simply, "I love you." When I finished reading it, I stared at the screen for a few seconds. I did not reply. I put my phone aside and went on with my day. A few hours later, I had to stop by the office to review some documents. While I was there, I remembered something that had been on my mind for several weeks. Months ago, my boss had approached me with a proposal. The company was starting a major project, opening a new manufacturing plant in collaboration with a partner in China. It was a huge expansion, and they needed someone with experience to help coordinate everything from the ground up. For that reason, they had been evaluating several managers with a proven track record within the company. I was one of the candidates they were considering, not just because of my years of service, but because there was something on my resume that was uncommon. I spoke multiple languages. In addition to English, I was also fluent in Spanish, French, and Mandarin Chinese. I had learned Mandarin years ago out of personal interest. At the time, I studied it because I found the language fascinating, never imagining I would use it in my professional career. However, that detail had apparently caught the attention of upper management. When they started looking for candidates for the transfer, my boss had called me into his office a few weeks prior to discuss the offer. The idea was straightforward: a temporary relocation to China to help organize the startup of the new plant. The initial contract would be for 6 months. After that, the company would evaluate the situation with me again. If I wanted to return, I could. But if I preferred to stay longer, or even permanently, that option was on the table. The package they offered was very attractive. It included company-paid housing, a significant salary increase, and several other benefits. When they first made me the offer, I was honestly very interested. It was a huge professional opportunity, but at the time, I hesitated. The main reason was Haley. It did not seem right to go to another country for months and leave her alone. I thought it could seriously damage our relationship. That is why I told my boss I needed time to think it over. He understood and said I could take a few weeks to give him a final answer. As I sat in my office that Saturday, I remembered that conversation perfectly. I also remembered that my boss had asked me not to take too long, because if I turned it down, they would have to find another manager for the position. I sat at my desk, thinking about everything that had happened in recent weeks, the constant arguments, the uncomfortable conversations, the plan to spend entire weekends at a cabin with her ex-boyfriend, and the message I had read that very morning. For the first time in a long while, I felt something very clearly. I was not willing to keep living in those kinds of situations. It simply was not the life I wanted for myself. I did not want to spend months arguing over things that, from my perspective, were basic boundaries in a relationship. That was the moment I made my decision. I got up from my chair, walked out of my office, and went down the hall to my boss's office. I knocked on the door. "Come in," I heard from inside. I opened it and walked in. "Good morning, sir," I said. He looked up from some documents he was reviewing. "Good morning, Jacob." I sat down in front of his desk. "I wanted to give you my answer regarding the transfer offer to China." My boss set his papers aside and looked at me attentively. "Good," he said. "What have you decided?" Then he added a few more details. "Remember, the housing will be covered by the company. The initial contract is for 6 months. If you decide to come back after that, we will find another manager to continue the work. But if you decide to stay, the housing and the salary increase will be maintained." I nodded. "I accept, sir. I will go." My boss smiled immediately. "Congratulations, Jacob. I knew I could count on you." Then he checked something quickly on his computer and added, "Your flight leaves tomorrow at 5 in the morning." That took me by surprise. "Tomorrow?" "Yes," he answered. "The project is already in motion and they need someone on the ground as soon as possible." He continued explaining, "You will have 3 days to get settled. Then you will formally start your duties." I nodded. I left his office with a strange mix of emotions. On the one hand, I knew I had just made a huge decision for my career. On the other hand, I was also aware that this decision was going to change a lot of things in my personal life. That same day, I started getting the basics in order. I packed a suitcase with the essentials. I did not have time to plan much. Haley did not come back to the apartment that Saturday. We did not speak either. Very early on Sunday morning, I left for the airport. The flight was long. For a large part of the trip, I kept thinking about everything that was happening, not just with work, but with the relationship that was probably coming to an end. When I finally landed in China, everything was a bit overwhelming. It was a completely different world from what I was used to. The airport was enormous, the city was filled with modern skyscrapers, and the number of people was incredible. While I was waiting for the car the company had sent to pick me up, I felt my phone vibrate. I looked at the screen. It was a message from Haley. It read, "Babe, where are you? You were supposed to be relaxing on a Sunday. I brought you some food from the get-together. Did you go out somewhere?" I read the message a couple of times. For a few seconds, I debated whether to answer or just ignore it, but I finally decided to reply. I wrote something simple. "I am a bit far away." The response came almost instantly. "What time are you coming back?" I looked at the message, and for the first time since all this started, I felt a strange sense of calm. I knew exactly what I was going to say. I replied, "I might be a while. I am thinking about 6 months, maybe more." Barely a few seconds passed before my phone started ringing. It was her. I answered. "What are you talking about?" That was the first thing she said. Her voice was full of confusion. I took a calm breath before answering. "I am in China." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. "What?" "I accepted the work transfer," I explained, "the one I told you about a while ago." I could hear her breathing change. "No, you cannot be serious," she said. "You promised you would not accept that for the sake of our relationship." I stayed quiet for a few seconds before answering. "I changed my mind. That was all it took for her to start crying. How could you do that? She said through her tears. You said you did not want to leave me alone. I answered calmly. I also said I was not comfortable with your friendship with your ex. She did not reply right away, so I continued. If you could not accept something as simple as setting boundaries with your ex to protect our relationship, I do not see why I should turn down a major opportunity for my career. On the other side of the call, I could only hear her heavy breathing. Finally, she spoke. This is not the same. I answered calmly. To me, it is. A brief silence hung between us. Then she said something that honestly surprised me. It was not about the relationship or about me being on the other side of the world. Her first concern was something else entirely. And what is going to happen with the apartment? I did not answer immediately. She kept talking. The rent, the utilities. You paid for all of that. Her voice no longer sounded as sad. Now, it was laced with worry. I guess you will have to take care of it now, I replied. What do you mean, me? She said, her voice filled with panic. Then she added quickly, you know my business is not making enough money yet. I stayed silent. She kept insisting. So, are you going to send me money? For a moment, I thought she was joking, but she was not. Her tone was completely serious, and I could not help it. I started laughing. It was not a nervous chuckle. It was a loud, genuine laugh. She was silent for a few seconds. Do you think this is funny? She asked, annoyed. I was still laughing a little when I finally answered. Yes. There was another uncomfortable silence. I did not add anything else. I simply ended the call. Then I opened our message thread and typed one last, very short message. We are done. I sent it. Then I blocked her number. That was the end of all communication between us. The truth is, I did not have to worry much about the apartment. When Haley and I moved into that place, it was mostly furnished. The couch, the bed, the dining table. Almost everything was already there. There were not many things that were actually mine, just my clothes, some personal items, and a few small kitchen appliances. I even remember leaving some glasses in the cupboard because it honestly did not make sense to take them with me. I did not feel like I was losing anything important. When I arrived at the corporate apartment the company assigned me in China, my life changed significantly. It was a modern place, relatively close to the new plant where I would be working. The first few days were intense. I had to adapt to a new country, meet the local team, and start organizing countless things related to the project. But despite the exhaustion, I felt good, much calmer than I had felt in months. There were no more constant arguments, no more of that permanent tension. There was only work and a clear, predictable routine. A few weeks passed. One day, I received a message from an unknown number. It was one of Haley's friends. The message started with, Hi Jacob. I do not know if I should be messaging you, but I think you should know that Haley is not doing well. I did not reply. I kept reading. She has been really down since you left. Plus, she is having money problems. I read the entire message. According to her friend, Haley was going through a difficult time. Her business was failing, and apparently, she was struggling to pay for the apartment and other expenses. When I finished reading it, I made a simple decision. I blocked that number too. I felt no guilt about it. The relationship was over. I had made my decision, and to be honest, she had made hers long before. Since then, I have focused entirely on my work. The project at the plant is progressing well, and my boss seems very happy with the results so far. Sometimes I think about how things might have turned out if I had made a different choice, but the truth is, I have no regrets. Over time, I came to understand something quite simple. A relationship only works when both people are willing to respect and protect certain boundaries. When one person starts treating those boundaries as if they are nothing more than the other person's insecurities, the end is probably not far off. In my case, that end arrived the moment I stepped onto a plane headed for another continent. Comment. I want to take a moment to talk about something we all struggle with at some point. Sometimes, walking away is the most powerful act of self-care you can choose. Setting boundaries is never about controlling someone else. It is simply a way to protect your heart and maintain the respect you deserve. You might feel guilty for prioritizing your peace when others try to invalidate your feelings. Please remember that your emotions matter, and your peace of mind is truly priceless. Healing starts the moment you stop accepting less than what makes you feel safe and valued. I hope you always find the courage to step into spaces where your trust is fully honored. Thank you for spending your time with me today. I would love to read in the comments about how you choose to protect your energy and well-being. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.